Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 12, verse 2. This is a very famous section of the Torah. In fact, there's a special maftir about it before Pesach, Parshas HaKodesh. And the primary psukim in this section talk about the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, of the special offering that the Jewish people are to bring as a merit with the blood from the Korban Pesach will go on their doors, and that will protect them from the plague of the firstborn. Of course, in the times of Beis HaMikdash, we still do the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. Okay, but the introductory mitzvah before we get to the Korban Pesach is the mitzvah of Kodesh, of the idea of a new month. And that, interestingly, was the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people in association with the Exodus. In other words, before they had the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, which was going to be the 14th of the month, they have the mitzvah of declaring Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because when it's the first day of the month of Nisan, then you can have the 14th day of Nisan to bring the Korban Pesach. And so the famous phrase in the Pasuk is, Chodesh Hazel Lochem Rosh Chodashim. This month is for you, the first of months. And that's the idea. The feeling that this is somewhat, I don't know what word to use, perhaps anticlimactic. It's not really the right word, but it's just a strange feeling. In other words, if I were to tell you, if I were to have begun all dramatically today, say, we're going to discuss the first mitzvah the Jewish people were given in preparation for the Exodus, and you would not have thought to make sure to turn the page of the calendar and write Nisan across the top. Now, of course, the idea of Kiddush HaChodesh is more complicated than we connect to it today. There's the idea of Beis Din and accepting of witnesses and the like. But I just want to share with you a really interesting sforno on Pasuk Beis. I should also say, before we get to the sforno, the classic understanding of why the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is so significant is the idea of the Jewish people declaring the new month, and all the holidays are connected to the months, really represents the Jewish people's role in bringing sanctity to the world. So there is a very moving symbolism in that, and message in that. Look at the sforno on Pasuk Beis. HaChodesh Hazel Lochem Rosh Chodashim. Mekan ve'elach yuach hadashim shalochem. From this point on, the months will be your own. Lasos bohem kirtzonechem. You'll be able to do whatever you want during the months. Avu b'mei hashibud lo hayu yemechem shalochem. But during the servitude in Egypt, your days weren't your own. Aval hayu lavodas hacherim uritzonam. It was always, you were doing other people's bidding. But starting from this month, this is going to be the month you're going to get out of here. The month and every day of the month and all subsequent months will be your own. Lefichach rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana. The next phrase in the pasuk is, this is the first month for you of the months of the year. It's actually very interesting on a purely technical level. If I were to ask you what's the first Jewish month of the year, many people would answer Tishrei. It's far from clear that that's the correct answer. Tishrei, of course, is the month of Rosh Hashanah, but we say, it says it in the pasuk in this week's parsha, the first of the months of the year is Nisan. The sforno says that's why everything counts from here. Kibo hischem etziuschem habachiri. That's where you begin your essence as a nation with free will, and that can serve God as you wish. It's just an interesting idea to think about. Okay, verse 3. Dabru kol adas Yisrael limor. Speak to the entire congregation of the Jewish people. Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of the month. V'yichu lahem ish sel ve'savos sel aboyis. And everyone should take a sheep for the household, for the like Beis like the extended family, and the sheep for the household. Okay, so the Korban Pesach is to be done with the sheep. If you look at the Ramban on Pasuk Gimel, ish sel ve'savos, tam ha-mitzvah azos, the significance of this mitzvah, bavur ki mazel tleh b'chodesh Nisan b'kocho hagadol, ki mazel hatzomeach. Looking at the constellations, the month of Nisan is, at a constellation level, is associated with a sheep. Therefore, there's an instruction to slaughter this sheep and eat it. It's a very powerful statement. Ramban is saying the Jewish people are about to leave. Why are they getting out now? You could answer it in two very different ways. You could say, because this is what God wants, and this is the Jewish God is freeing them. Or you could say, I guess it was just in the cards this way. There's a wheel of time, and sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down, and there's no real rhyme or reason for anything. Maybe it's just in the stars. So the Jewish people believe it's much more than in the stars. So they take the creature, which this particular month represents the stars more than any other, and they slaughter it and they eat it as a statement of their service to God, because that's their way of saying that all the great things that are going to happen in this month are not because of the stars, they're because of their God. And that's the idea. The Ramban also cites the Medrash that the Egyptians, they actually worshiped this animal. So that's also very meaningful, that this is what we think of you and your worship, because we know that what we believe is that it's about our God, not about this animal that you worship. That's another idea of slaughtering this animal. So that's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's jump ahead to verse 21. Okay, so God has just given Moshe all of the rules involving the Korban Pesach, and now in verse 21, Moshe now is going to relay it. Moshe calls out to all the elders of Israel and he tells them, take a sheep for your families and slaughter the Korban Pesach. And he begins to give them instructions about the Pesach. There's something very interesting about this introductory pasuk that we write here about Moshe. Shouldn't it have just said that Moshe spoke to the nation? Why is he speaking to the elders? It says Moshe spoke to the elders, and presumably the idea is that the elders are in turn supposed to relate to the nation. Why doesn't Moshe just tell everybody? We have this all the time later on as they go into the desert. Moshe would speak to everybody. Why here is he talking to the elders? Or Achayim on pasuk Chaf Aleph. Vayikra Moshe l'chozik Israel v'agam ki Hashem Amar Elov Dabru Kol Adas Yisrael. It's true that God told the question is better than I said. God said speak to the Jewish people. Moshe isn't even doing exactly what God said in the first place. Yeperusho Kamamar v'im Kol Adas Yisrael Yishku Sheyomar Al Haskenim K'Moshe Mefurash Bimkoma v'Yomer Aleim Yichavein L'Shara'am K'Mishpat Kometz Vas Hashem L'Yisrael Shahayu Mipi Moshe. The bottom line is, the Or HaChaim says elsewhere in the Torah too, there's a language of if the Jewish people do this, and it refers to the elders. It means the elders. So maybe that's the pshat here too. Maybe all God meant is tell the elders and they'll convey it to the Jewish people. But now he says something else. O Efshar, Shalo Amar Elalis Canaan. Or maybe, the first thing that Or HaChaim said is that Moshe will tell the elders and he'll also tell all the people. Or it's possible that Moshe only told the elders. And the elders will in turn convey to the Jewish people. And this mitzvah will be different than all the other mitzvahs. It's very interesting. Or HaChaim says, all these mitzvahs that we learn about in the desert, the Jewish people had already signed on. They were in a covenant with God. They had accepted Torah at Har Sinai. So Moshe is just giving them explanation as to what they already agreed to. They didn't sign up for this. They never said they're going to do whatever God says. So he spoke to the elders. And so now this is really going to be some salesmanship here. And we're going to have people who know who they're talking to and know how to speak to them. And it can be some people need to be spoken in some way, and some people need to be spoken in another way. So it shouldn't be that Moshe speaks to the entire nation. Moshe will speak to the next level of leadership, and they will fan out and speak to the members of Klal Yisrael, each in the appropriate way. Kodesh nochem lasso, so that they'll be inclined. Remember, this is going to be a pretty scary mitzvah to do because they were about to slaughter the animal that their masters worshipped. Took a lot of guts, a lot of courage, and they hadn't signed up for this mitzvah, and they hadn't signed up for mitzvahs in general. So the Orach Chaim says, particularly because they hadn't even agreed to do the mitzvahs in general, Moshe wanted the elders to convey messages to the Jewish people as was appropriate. Okay, as would be effective. Let's go on now to verse 24. So Moshe has given a basic description of the Korban Pesach. Presumably Moshe said more than just 2 or 3 psukim here. Moshe relayed all the psukim before as well. But in verse 24, Moshe closes out, Ushmartem es hadavar hazeh, and you should observe this matter, l'chak l'cha ulvanecha ad olam, as a law for you and your children eternally. Now, this is a real interesting pasuk because one of the few psukim over here that Moshe actually explains what we're talking about, one of the 2 psukim, I should say, is in verse 22. If you glance at verse 22, Moshe tells them the whole thing about the blood of the Korban Pesach. They should sprinkle on the doorposts. And then 2 psukim later, he says, this should be for you and your children eternally. Now, we don't do the Korban Pesach today because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. But God willing, when we do have a Beis HaMikdash, we're not sprinkling blood on our doorposts. That was a one-time shot. That was in Egypt. That's it. The sacrifice will be brought many, many more times, and has been brought many times. But what does it mean when it says you should observe this, you and your children eternally? It's not true. So interesting Orach Chaim over here. Orach Chaim b'shmartem es hadavar hazeh. Hine pshara kasav yagid gam l'doros yitzav dvarim amurim be'inyan. Taking the pasuk literally, it sounds like that this directive is relevant for future generations. We're not aware that subsequent generations sprinkled blood on the doorposts. It's not in the Talmudic literature that we're supposed to do that. He says, you know how you should read the pasuk? It should be l'chak l'cha. It should be a law for you, kama ulvanecha, and should also be for your children. When you think about it, it doesn't even have to say it should be for you and for your children. It should be for the collective you. Why does it have to be for you and for your children? Gila hamechuven shual zeh. It's revealing the following: she'ein advarim shavim bo ubibno. The mitzvah for this generation is going to be different than the mitzvah for subsequent generations. The concept is that you will do exactly as we described before. Your children will do the general gist of what we described, but not everything that we described. So that's just an interesting shot for the pasuk. So we discussed this morning the Sforno regarding the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. We discussed the Ramban regarding why this animal is being killed. We discussed Orach Chaim regarding why is Moshe only talking to the elders. We also discussed Orach Chaim regarding how to look at the pasuk that says this is an eternal mitzvah when we don't do various aspects of the mitzvah, save for the one time of the Korban Pesach in Egypt.